Hello and welcome to India's World. US President Donald Trump has formally withdrawn America from the Trans-Pacific Partnership or TPP, a flagship trade deal with 11 countries in the Pacific Rim. With the US opting out of the TPP, the only remaining countries in the trade deal are Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, New Zealand, Singapore and Vietnam. The TPP was the world's largest regional trade agreement involving 12 nations, accounting for about 40% of the global economy. The TPP was expected to eliminate more than 98% of tariffs in the region. Beyond market access, the TPP was to create a single set of trade and investment rules between its member countries, making it easier and simpler for them to trade in the region. The TPP was one of President Barack Obama's signature efforts. It was aimed at increasing America's influence in Asia and check China's economic and military ambitions. The TPP was never ratified by the Republican-controlled US Congress, however. Several Democrats were also opposed to it, including Trump's election opponent Hillary Clinton. To discuss the implications of President Trump withdrawing from the TPP, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us three eminent diplomats. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, he was Foreign Secretary of India and has served as India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France and Russia. Ambassador Meera Shankar, she was India's ambassador to the United States, and Ambassador Aftab, Seth. He was India's ambassador to Greece, Vietnam and Japan. I welcome you all to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin by asking you the first question. Why did the US Congress initially give fast-track authority to President Barack Obama to sign the TPP, push it through, and why did the public sentiment for the deal erode soon thereafter?
Well, you know, there was a lot of criticism in many circles about the secrecy with which the TPP was being negotiated. Nothing was being made public. So the public was not aware of the implications of this. It has strategic dimensions, and naturally if the administration takes an initiative, the Congress will likely go along with it unless it's something which is manifestly against the interests of the country, which is not the case. No US administration will take a decision which is against the interests of the country. So it was part of the management of America's external trade and its investment and other interests in the rest of the world. The sentiment changed for this reason, two reasons. One, of course, the secrecy involved in this, and secondly, mounting concern about job losses, about US firms investing in other countries and then exporting from those countries into the United States, hurting even more the jobs in the country. So I think slowly the sentiment changed. There are other factors also which account for this, but that will mean a long answer. But basically these are the two things.
Meera, there were Democrats, progressive Democrats like Bernie Sanders who had opposed TPP right from the beginning, saying that such trade deals favor big corporations, they result in loss of jobs and they depress wages. And if you take the case of Hillary Clinton herself, as Secretary of State, she supported the deal. Then she was a fence-sitter. And when she became a candidate for the presidential election, she started opposing the deal. So the working class didn't trust her and voted for Donald Trump. So is it fair to say that Trump has cancelled the deal and it's very bad, just because he's doing it in the context of increasing xenophobia, right-wing populism, etc. But the fact is that Democrats are equally to blame for first going ahead with the TPP and then opposing it.
Well, a large section of the Democratic, some section, I won't say a large, some sections of the Democratic Party and certainly organized labor and workers groups had opposed the fast-track authority very fiercely when it was first granted, and the administration of Barack Obama had to reach across the aisle to Republicans to get that fast-track authority, because within the Democratic Party there were so many opponents. So I think this was something which was opposed right from the beginning, but naturally with the presidential election in the pipeline, it gathers momentum because you want to listen to the majority opinion, because that's how they are going to vote. And that is what happened. You remember even when NAFTA was being negotiated, Ross Perot had said, I hear that sucking sound, where jobs are being sucked out of the United States to Mexico. And in actual practice, that's what the working class feels, that a lot of, lower end manufacturing jobs have shifted to Mexico as a result of NAFTA.
Well, Ross Perot lost,
Yes,
but Donald Trump won.
But because of the experience, I think, and of course after the financial crisis, the extreme shock to the US economy, from which it is still to recover in a very robust fashion. All this, I think, added to that sense of insecurity and anxiety among sections of people within the US, combined with the growing inequality.
Master Seth, what would be the long-term impact of the US withdrawal from TPP? How would it affect the ability of the US to influence world economic and political affairs, especially in this region, since you've served in at least two of the countries which are part of TPP, Japan and Vietnam?
Well, you know, American foreign policy, American the American view of the world has veered over history, over the last 70, 80 years, if you look at the history of America, between activism and outward-looking policies, followed occasionally, almost immediately, by periods of inward-looking, fortress America. We are able to do everything ourselves. We don't need these aliens who are not very trustworthy, and so on and so forth. This you have seen over history. So now, after the very activist 8 years of Obama, you come back to a more inward-looking fortress America kind of attitude by Trump. But unless he dismantles things like NATO and so on, these alliances are still there, and as long as they are in place, the US security treaty with Japan is still in place, the treaty with Korea is still in place. As long as these treaties are still in place, America's influence in the world, in the region, will continue.
Yeah, but he has said that, why should these treaties be there? He's questioned the very basis of the treaty with Korea as well as with Japan. So my question to you, and a quick answer, please. Does this send a signal that America's traditional economic and political alliances are now open to reassessment and renegotiation?
Clearly, he's putting pressure on his allies as well as his adversary to renegotiate the terms of engagement, not only economic but security arrangements also. I think the feeling has grown that, and this was expressed rather brutally in the inaugural speech of Trump, that America has sacrificed itself for the interests of others and suffered all the consequences of its own generosity, where the others have profited from American protection and everything else. So this kind of an inward-looking, self-serving narrative actually is not rooted in reality. In actual fact, all that the United States was doing, including this TPP and everything else, was to further entrench US global leadership and global hegemony in all fields. It's a different matter that the electoral pressures have brought about a certain change, and maybe Trump thinks that he can, as I said, renegotiate the terms, and America will come out stronger still and be able to impose his will even more on the rest of the world.
Well, that remains to be seen, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the fallout of US withdrawal from TPP. Meera, TPP was a sort of signature deal as far as President Barack Obama was concerned. It was part of his pivot to Asia.
Yes.
What happens to pivot to Asia now?
Well, we have to see what President Trump says. I mean, he said he's not going to follow through on the pivot to Asia. But then on the other hand, he has said he is not going to let China get away without challenging actions which go against international law. For instance, the most recent statement on denying China access to islands in the South China Sea, which are in international waters. Similarly, on trade, he has said he will challenge China as a currency manipulator and so on. So, on the one hand, he has talked of withdrawing and focusing on making America great and putting America first. But on the other hand, he's also talking of spending more on the military. Yeah. He has already, in one of the first statements, challenged China's access. So I don't know whether he will actually withdraw from Asia or pursue the policy of balance under some other form.
Okay. Ambassador Aftab said, would this, for example, give more leeway to President Xi Jinping to position China as an economic and military anchor in the Western Pacific?
Well, I think, he's going to try and push the regional cooperation economic partnership in which we are also involved. But, whatever he might have said about Japan and Korea and the Western allies not paying enough for US troops, if he's strengthening the US troops, don't forget he's got 40,000 of them on the ground in Japan and about 40-odd thousand on the ground in Korea. Now, what are they there for? They have to be maintained, they have to be supplied. So, the US armed forces, and there are troops on the ground in the Western Hemisphere as well, they will continue to be there. So, unless he actually withdraws these troops, I don't see on the ground all that much difference in what American influence is going to be.
I want to say something about this TPP business. It's not as if he just walks out of the TPP and that's the end of what America might want to do on the economic side in this region.
No,
he has very clearly stated that he's going to enter into
I was going to ask you a question, right? And my question to you is, can he successfully pursue bilateral deals with individual countries, let's more specifically with Japan and Vietnam, which would actually mirror the good points of TPP and is in America's favor?
Yes, he can. I think that's what the intention is, that he enters into individual deals. Because behind this, there is this obsession with bringing jobs back home. He doesn't want to create a situation where the multinational corporations find it more profitable to invest in these countries, or for Japan to invest in countries like Mexico and others, and from there taking advantage of cheap labor and everything else and export to the United States. So this is what he wants to prevent. But he will enter into bilateral deals with all these countries, put pressure on them, and actually hope to get much greater advantage in the negotiations. So it's not as if the TPP means a total withdrawal of the United States from the scene and leaving the field open to China. Not at all.
Not at all. Nobody is saying that. I'm merely saying that, see, the Trump administration says that it will go for these bilateral deals and is against multilateral deals. Meera, the reason they say is that it's easier to negotiate bilateral deals which are advantageous to you than to negotiate multilateral deals where smaller countries get disproportionate amount of power to express themselves and push their agendas through. Do you agree with it?
Naturally, the US can take advantage of the power asymmetry much more bilaterally. And in the past, their trade negotiations with both Japan and South Korea conducted by the USTR have been extremely fierce. And eventually they did get compromises, both in terms of market openings in South Korea and Japan in the sectors which may hitherto have been closed or not sufficiently open to the US, and also in terms of getting more investments from these countries in the US rather than exports, so that job creation occurred within the US. So I do see that they could certainly pursue some of these things bilaterally. Militarily, he's also said that he will have a develop a full-fledged ballistic missile system against North Korea and Iran. So the deployment area, if you look at this, would really be in East Asia. And already Japan hosts the Aegis missile defense systems at sea. So the US, one way or the other, would work with the allies.
But sticking to trade, I mean, are we seeing the unraveling of the multilateral trade system? That, if it is true, as Meera says, that bigger countries can get favorable terms in bilateral negotiations using their sheer size, then why have these so many free trade agreements? All the big countries will withdraw and smaller countries can then go around doing bilateral deals. Is this what is happening?
Well, there were people in Japan, for example, who are afraid of the American, size and their preponderance in terms of economic weight. This is particularly so amongst the left in Japan. Small as it is, the Communist Party of Japan has increased in numbers exponentially, while the ruling party party members, has gone down. Now, this is because there are a large number of people who are earning less than 2 million yen, which is what, $20,000 a year. So these people are attracted by this, and they look at the big business interests which are behind things like the TPP with a great deal of foreboding and fear. So for them, yes, the unraveling of the TPP may not be an unmixed blessing. For those in Vietnam, for example, who were being pressured to open up the economy, to allow things like trade unions, which were anathema to the ruling Communist Party, will now breathe a sigh of relief because that pressure is likely to subside. And the exports of the Vietnamese, apparels, seafood, is unlikely to be affected.
Okay, so we need to take a break at this point again. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the possible fallout of the US withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Mr. Sibal, do you agree that do you agree with those who say that by quitting the TPP, the US is effectively declining to take part in crafting of rules and institutions, which would, as some people have said, would be the gold standard for international trade, and that now China's preferences will be reflected in these deals if these multilateral deals go forward even without the US?
Well, before I answer that question, the United States was already getting frustrated with the WTO, precisely for the reasons you mentioned. The smaller countries have more weight than actually they're entitled to within that kind of a system, because it is by consensus, so even smaller countries can hold up consensus. Even India has played its role in holding up consensus on some issues. And therefore, there was this push by the US corporations for the TPP, which actually many people say had very little to do with trade, but everything to do with non-trade issues like labor, environment standards, and investment, and very importantly, the capacity of multinational corporations to sue foreign governments. And now Europe and Canada are putting pressure on India to include this element in the WTO negotiations, which our Minister of Commerce has squarely refused. So the whole idea was to make the whole thing very comfortable for US investors. Now, if from the Trump's point of view, this is precisely his problem. He doesn't want to make the external environment so comfortable for US investors that they don't invest in India, in the United States, but invest abroad. So there is a method in his madness. Secondly, will China be able to step into the shoes and do bilateral deals? I think already there is some degree of pressure on these countries to try and have separate deals with China, because China can't be ignored. It has sitting on huge reserves. It wants to invest. It has these huge projects, and they wouldn't mind US investing, China investing in these countries. So China will be able to shape the environment to some extent, but that doesn't mean because US will remain active, it will have bilateral deals, it will have other ways of tying these countries up to the US economy. So it's not a lost game for the United States.
Okay. Meera, Japan has said that there's no point pursuing the TPP if the US is out. On the other hand, Australia and New Zealand had said that doesn't matter if the US is out, we should invite China into TPP and invite other countries like Indonesia to join TPP. So could it be that it's a blessing in disguise for this region that US is out, and now you have many more countries of the region which were not part of TPP with a different set of rules? Who knows, even India? Because India's objections were precisely what Master Sibal was pointing out. So if the rules change, it may be beneficial for India also to join TPP.
Well, by TPP, you're already pursuing that regional comprehensive economic, partnership agreement, which has China. But from India's point of view, any arrangement which has China but doesn't have the US could end up being unbalanced.
Okay, so forget India for the time being, but let's say Indonesia and other countries of the region, they could join.
Many of them also are a little wary of Chinese economic hegemony and actively were courting the US to have the pivot towards Asia as a balancer to China. So I think many of them would like the US to be involved in some way. But
no, I'm still on trade. I'm not on military affairs.
In trade itself, they would like the US or Europe to be involved with Asia, rather than have only a dependency on China.
Okay. Ambassador Seth, Meera mentioned RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is also being negotiated simultaneously even as TPP was going on. So, US withdrawal from TPP, what impact could it have on RCEP? Because it's being negotiated between 10 ASEAN governments plus their 6 free trade partners. And several countries are, they were part of TPP and they're also part of RCEP. So would RCEP now be hastened because of US withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
On the contrary, it might go a little slower because the pressure on the RCEP to reach a deal, now they were supposed to have reached a deal by December last year. You would have known that this has been postponed till December this year. So I think it may slow it down because that pressure and the pressure to have, human rights and child labor and all these other things which many of the countries in this region feel are intrusive, that pressure is off. But yes, China is the biggest trade partner of Japan. It is the biggest trade partner of Vietnam. It is our biggest trade partner. So China is very much a presence for all of us. But I agree with Meera that all these countries, certainly Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and even Indonesia, would have liked the United States to be there as a balance to this preponderance of Chinese economic influence and with it military and strategic influence.
Ms. Sibal, is it possible that RCEP becomes a much bigger and more comprehensive trade agreement in the countries of this region because it has different set of trade rules, even if it has issues of child labor but the intellectual property rights issues, the issue of bribery and corruption, the kind of things that US was imposing in TPP are missing in RCEP. So even if it excludes US, it includes China, it includes India, and it includes several countries like Japan, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Vietnam, and New Zealand, who are also a part of TPP. So a larger a trade arrangement with sets of rules which are acceptable to countries of this region.
Yeah, but we have concerns. I don't know if other countries have similar concerns that we don't want RCEP to effectively become a free trade area which would be totally to the advantage of China, and this is what China is pushing for. China's trade practices and its mercantilistic approach and the fact that it doesn't open up its own market, it doesn't abide by the WTO rules, and it is flexing its muscles in every possible way. This is not something that we would like to encourage within RCEP. So it is true that it is mainly in China's interest that this gets pushed forward, but I don't know if it'll be that easy. Secondly, China has floated the other idea to counter the TPP, which was the free trade area for the Asia and Pacific centered around APEC. That was to include everybody, China and United States and everything. So I think that project will also go in for a 6 because of the Trump position on APEC. So China is a problem for everybody, although they have very strong economic ties with Australia, with ASEAN, with Indonesia, everybody else. China is already a player. Yeah. But if China wants other people to open their markets and allow Chinese companies to invest, the reverse should also be true, that China must open up its market and be a honest, fair trader and open up its own market, which they are resisting even with regard to India's goods.
But quickly, we've really run out of time, so I'm just asking you to answer this in one sentence. Is the erosion in TPP or the breaking out TPP advantageous to India?
Yes,
it is.
It is.
Is it
Yes,
advantageous?
Yes, I
Why?
would agree. Because we were outside the TPP and the effort was to establish WTO plus norms, which India and China would then willy-nilly have to accept or be at a disadvantage.
Singapore leader, Mehbubani, a great thinker, he has said that we can really take the fullest advantage of this and renegotiate our situation with a lot of countries, renegotiate our trade deals with a large number of countries and benefit by Trump pulling out of the TPP.
All right, thank you. On that note, we have to end because we run out of time. I would like to thank all of you, Ambassador Aftab Seth, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again as usual next week. Until then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.